On this episode of Tomo's Tune-Ups, I'm going to show you how to set the timing on your classic Mini. So welcome back to the channel, folks. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're new here, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button below. And for those of you who have already subscribed, how you going? So essentially, we are going to be doing the timing on this A-Series engine. So this is a 1330 in which I'm currently building, and I'm going to go through and show you how to set the timing on a classic Mini. So I have done a video on this previously, and I did get not so much a complaint, but someone in the comment section left a comment saying, hey, you really need to go through and demonstrate exactly what's going on, as well as the dial gauge indicator and how to accurately read it, because previously it was on a really bad angle. I was sitting on the ground, I was turning it, I was adjusting it, the lighting wasn't great. So I'm gonna redo it and show you guys how to do it step by step. So there's a few things about ignition timing we need to know. First of all, what is it? Well, this is what keeps the engine in time. And why? Why does it need to be timed? Well, it's simply because everything needs to work in harmony with each other. The push rods need to be acting at the right time on the rocker arm to open the valve to let either air and fuel in or the exhaust gases out. The valves need to be closed at the right time to ensure the right combustion. The spark plug needs to be firing at the right time. All of these things need to work in conjunction with each other. If one thing isn't set correctly here, you'll find it'll create a variety of problems, such as overheating. You're going to create pinging, which then can cause piston damage. It can just snowball into massive problems. So this is something you really need to make sure you get right the first time. And if not, do it as many times as you need to make sure you get it right. So the first thing about this is I'm going to grab the camera in a second and show you a couple of the dots in which are marked on both the camshaft sprocket, so this one here, and the crankshaft sprocket. Now we are using a vernier style timing chain. This is my highly recommended style of timing chain. I do like it. It does give you an adjustability, so you can dial it in exactly where you need it to be. And why is that important? Well, simply because you want to maximize the amount of lift that's there, therefore how much it's going to be opening the valve and at what timing. That way you can ensure you're going to run it at the best possible performance and economy level in which you're after. Now, generally hand in hand, economy and performance generally can go in hand. However, you need to make sure as well that if you are after performance, chances are you're not after fuel economy. If you're after fuel economy, you're generally not going to get the best performance, because with an engine like this, if you drive it hard, it's going to use a lot of fuel. If you drive it sensibly, depending what you've done to the engine, it's probably going to burn fuel all right. So those two things, you need to work out exactly which one you're after. If you're after power, go for it. It's going to chew all the fuel, but it's going to go like a bat out of hell. If you want to drive this thing on the highway and get good gas mileage or fuel mileage, whatever, you'd probably then need to compromise a little bit of performance, as I said, depending on the engine and the style of setup in which you're running. So there are two dots on both the cam and the crankshaft pulley. These dots, as a rule of thumb, do need to be lined up. However, for our application, they are not going to be lined up the entire time, especially when we're finished. And why is that? Well, simply, if you are building a stock engine, you need to line these dots up to create the timing, and that's fine. If you are doing a stock engine only, that is the only time in which this is applicable to be able to line those dots up. If there's no camshaft in there, there's no big bore pistons, there's no headwork done, if it's just a standard engine and you just want to give it a refresh, then that will be suffice, because you're not trying to optimize the amount of power out of this engine. You're just trying to make it as economical as you can. You can generally tune that with a timing light. You can do it with the distributor, and you can also do it with carburetor. So there's a couple of things that you do need to adjust regardless of what setup it is, whether you're running a performance engine like this or whether you just want to rebuild an 850, for instance, and just make the standard horsepower. First thing you want to do is line up those two dots. That's going to give us our base timing, so a really good starting point. Beyond that, there's a couple of different methods you can use. So if you're not just rebuilding a standard engine and you just want it back together, you've got two other options. One is you can go with a vernier style timing chain. Now what this enables is us to move the sprocket or the cam to where we need it to be to dial it in for maximum lift. So as I said, lift denotes the amount of opening of the valves at the right timing. If we get that spot on and dialed in 100% to where we need it, then we're going to create optimum lift. Therefore, we're going to maximize the amount of power out of the timing. Therefore, we can adjust the fuel and the ignition timing to suit. So that's option number one. The second option is if you don't want to run this setup, which I've spoken to Matt Reed from Reed Speed, and he doesn't like using these simply because you've now got 6 extra points of contact on here, which can then fail. So it's not as strong as one that is a solid piece, which is true. However, this gives you good adjustability. The other option that you can run is just a solid timing chain like this with no adjustment. But what you need to do is work out exactly what size offset key you need. So the key that goes on the end of the camshaft and goes onto the camshaft sprocket to degree the camshaft in. So both methods are good. However, the only difference is this kit, you can do it probably 2 or 3 times, get it right, dial it in, and away you go. Whereas the offset cam key, you have to work it out. Then you go have to order the parts. It might be a 3 or a 6 or a 1 degree offset key. Make sure you put it in the right way, put it in, retime it, recheck it, make sure it's fine. Oh, you then got it wrong. You then have to redo it, reorder another one, and go back and forth. So they do have their advantages and disadvantages, but this one I find to be one of the best setups because it has that adjustability, and you can generally time it within 1 or 2 degrees of where you need it to be before you then have to remove it off the sprocket off here. So it's not a cog, it's a sprocket, remember that. Where you need to remove the sprocket off, turn it one way so you either advance the timing or you retard it. Now advance is happening before the spark. So as the piston comes up, the valves are closed, the spark plug is occurring before it gets to top dead center. Retard, so retard timing that is happening after top dead center. So when the piston's at its highest point, it's then starting to go down, for instance, that is retarded timing. So we have advanced and we have retarded timing. So those 2 things are also important when doing this to understand exactly the fundamentals of how it works. So let's jump straight into it and work out how we need to set this up to suit the camshaft in which we've got. So you're probably wondering, what tools do I need to be able to do this? Well, to start with, you're gonna need 2 things. First one is a dial gauge indicator, and the second one is this timing wheel disc. So these can be bought from many different suppliers. This is the Kent Cams one. I bought this from Minisport. I'll leave a link in the description below. Now you're probably thinking like, what the hell is this and when am I ever gonna use that? Look, to be honest, you're probably gonna use it a couple of times, depending what you're doing with it. This can be used not only for checking top dead center of pistons, but also crankshaft thrust, run out of brake discs, variety of things on an engine. So if you're thinking that you're probably never going to use this again, there's probably a few things in which you can use this and accurately measure stuff like timing. So I'm going to run you through how to do it. Essentially what we want to do is place this on here. This has a magnetic base, so we're just going to turn it to on, which then means it's magnetic. Ta-da! It's going to sit there nice and easy, and it's not going to rattle around. So we want to place it between 2 cylinders. So I'll grab the camera. So long as it's situated on there and it's steady, then it'll be fine. So what we now need to do is loosen this adjuster off here. So we're going to move the dial gauge indicator. So it's kind of one of those things where you have to adjust and move and twist and bend and snap and all that to be able to. I'm going to adjust the gauge to have 1 mil preload. Actually, no, we'll go 2 mil of preload. We can work out exactly where it needs to be. And setting preload means that there's already an adjustment on there. So as the piston moves up, it can go one way, but also as it goes down, it can go the other way. The last thing you want to be doing is rotating the crankshaft and finding that it's already tapped out and there's nothing left in the gauge. And then you think, oh, that's top dead center, but actually there's more to go. So preload is super important, especially when doing this. So I'll grab the camera and let's come down and have a look at what we've done. All right, so I've got the dial gauge indicator set up just here. Essentially, I've set 2 mil of preload on it. So this little gauge just here in the middle, I've set it to preload. So if I just move that now up, it's going to move one way. If we release it, it's going to move the other way. The reason why you don't want this set to 0 preload is that when we move the crankshaft upwards, the piston's going to move up or down. If it moves up all the way and it's not with preload on it, you'll find that it will just tap out and then you won't be able to find exactly where top dead center is, or the other way it's going to go all the way down and it's not even touching. So this is what enables you to accurately measure where top dead center is of a piston, in this instance anyway. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to mount the camera back up there. we're going to rotate it until the piston comes all the way to the highest point, and then you'll find the dial gauge will start to climb, it'll plateau out, and then it will start to come down. That is exactly where we need it to be able to dial in the camshaft correctly. All right, so you can rotate the crankshaft a couple of different ways. Essentially, I'm just going to be using a screwdriver at the back where the flywheel would be in the groove that's cut out there. And we're just going to move it direction of rotation. So as you can see now, it's starting to go down. So if you look at the little dial, it's going backwards. So we are pushing the piston down. So we need to come back the other way. So we're going to go all the way to the top, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, until it comes to a complete stop. So you see it slowing down, and now it's going back the opposite way. Essentially what we want to be doing is bringing it back up to when it stops. So it should be about there. That, my friends, is the highest point at which the piston travels, which means that is top dead center. So if we go back then to, I'll just move the camera back. If we go back and have a look, sorry, let's take it off the stand. We go back and look at our marks. So you can see one of the marks is here. It might just be a little bit hard to see. And then the other mark is just here as well. So those two marks now are not even lined up whatsoever. So we've now timed our crank. We then need to time in our camshaft. All right, so next part of the build, what we need to do is grab the timing disc and the crankshaft bolt. So essentially we want to be putting that in there. You're not going to be tightening this. All you're going to be doing is just putting it on and just nipping it up with your hand. And then we can set where top dead center is. Now, what I like to do is put a bolt in here and then run it out and then run a bit of wire from there and work out exactly where top dead center is, and then we can work off there. So let's grab a bolt to stick in here, which I might just use. I should be able to use one of these. 5/16, yeah, cool. So you can do this a couple of different ways. You could run a bolt, you could put a bit of wire hanging down from the water pump, so long as it's a fixed location in which you can accurately tell where top dead center is for when you move the crank. Either way, that's all you really need to know. All right, so really good Tomo's tech tip here is what I use is a little bit of flux from soldering iron. It's really cheap, it's inexpensive, you can just use as much as you need. So what I do is you get it, just cut it. The longer bolt, the better I find this works, but this will be fine for this application. Essentially, we just want to be wrapping it around there a couple of times, just to make sure it's secure, and then we can make our little pointer out of it. Essentially what we're going to be doing is making sure that where it's at now, it's at top dead center. So we want to move this center wheel in that position and make sure that it is lined up 100% in line with that bit of wire. We might just need to nip that up a little bit, depending if it's going to move or not, which I think it just did. So it's just going to create one of those little issues in which you just have to make sure that you're able to line it up and that the bolt is tight enough so that way it's not going to come loose and give you an incorrect reading. All right, so before we move on, just want to quickly clarify something. This dial gauge indicator here that is attached to the crank pulley, when you've set this to top dead center, cylinder number 1, it's important to make sure that the word top faces the top. This will ensure that you get the most accurate reading to be able to dial in the camshaft. All right, so on to the next part. Essentially what we're going to be doing is putting in cylinder number 1 inlet push rod, and then we're going to be doing some measurements off there. Now you're probably wondering, why is it that we need to measure the crank and set it here, then measure the push rod and then do some further calculations? Well, essentially after you've set up the crankshaft to cylinder number 1 top dead center and set this to 0, this is what gives you the baseline to be able to work forward and work out what degree your camshaft is currently at. So without setting this up and just doing the push rod, you're not going to get an accurate reading, therefore you're not going to get the most advantage out of it, therefore it's not going to go the way that you want it to. So let's move forward and I'll show you what you need to do next. All right, so next part is to grab the push rods. We're using new ones because the old ones were bent. A really good way to know if a push rod is bent or not is to put it on a flat surface and roll it. If it rolls smoothly and continues to roll, it's probably all right. If it kind of rolls, then stops and comes back and forth a couple of times, chances are it's bent. You can generally look at it down the line like you would a piece of timber to see if it's bowed or not. But also when you put it on a flat surface, if it's bowed, you'll see the gap between the pushrod and the surface. It'll get narrower generally in the middle. So what we need to do is find pushrod hole number 2, which is this one here, which is the inlet cam. So this is the inlet cam for cylinder number 1. Being a single cam and only 2 valves per cylinder, we have an inlet, which is this one, and then exhaust, which goes down in through here. So that's the exhaust cam. This is the inlet cam just here. So what we now need to do is grab our dial gauge indicator. We need to adjust it, and then we need to set it on top of the push rod. So we want to try and bring it as close as we can. And once again, we want to set a little bit of preload, not a great deal, but just some. Now remember, it is going to move quite a lot to be able to accurately dial in the camshaft. So we'll probably look at about 50%, I reckon. So we should be probably go at about there, I reckon. Doesn't need to be super accurate just yet. We just have to work out exactly where it needs to be for the top of the lobe. So essentially what we're going to be doing here is rotating the engine over. Once we've rotated the engine over, we're then going to be looking at the top part of the camshaft. So a camshaft has a lobe at the top, and then it's got a circular section down the bottom. Essentially what we're going to be doing is rolling the camshaft over enough so we get the maximum lift. So at the bottom of the camshaft where it's quite dished, we want it to be at the opposite side. So when the needle starts to go haywire and starts to climb, it's going to get to the top of the lobe. Once we get to the top of the lobe, we're going to have a little point where the gauge will start to climb, and then it will stop, and then it will come back down. Once it starts to climb and stops, we need to find that exact 0, and then we can keep going with the timing. All right, so all I'm going to be doing here is just rotating the crankshaft in direction of rotation until we find where the highest point of the camshaft is. So you pretty much just want to keep going until it starts to slow down and then stop, and that's going to tell us where the highest point of the lobe is. So see how that's starting to go back the opposite way? If we then push it back, it's start to slow down, and back she comes. All right, so what we need to do is work out exactly where the highest point is, which should be probably about there. Okay. So we're just going to bring it back until it stops. This is where you really need to be super paranoid about getting the correct measurements. That way you can ensure that you get it set. All right, so now I've set that to 0. I'm just going to rock it back and forth again. So we're going to rock it back to here. Okay. And then we go back the other way just to make sure I've actually got it set to 0. Nah, so we're just off. Yep. All right. Okay, so once it's stopped, we're then just going to turn it just a fraction. Okay, so once again, just rock it back and forth, just make sure it goes. All right, fabulous. That is exactly where we need it to be. Set to 0, now let's move forward. All right, so next thing we need to do is work out exactly how much lift we need for the camshaft. We got ours from SwiftTune, and they sent us a piece of paper which tells us on there. Essentially every camshaft will have a lift value that it needs to be set at to be able to dial it in. That way you can get maximum performance out of it. So essentially we are using the SwiftTune SW10, so it needs to be set to 106 to 108 degrees full lift on number 1 inlet, and the tappets need to be set to 15 thou both inlet and exhaust. So now what we need to do is rotate the crankshaft in one direction. We're going to move it to say 10 thou on the gauge. We're going to take our reading. We're then going to move it back to 0, move it back to 10 thou. So we're going to get to the top of that lobe and then move it back the opposite way, go to 10 thou, take a measurement, and then plus the two together, divide it by 2, and then that's going to give us how much lift we have. All right, so I'm going to start with direction of rotation first. So once again, we're just going to go to 10 thou. Just going to rotate it to here. That's 10 thou. We are then going to document what our number is. So it is exactly 149. I'm going to write that number down. We're going to rotate it the opposite way that we just did and go back to 0. And then we're going to keep rotating it until it comes back to 10 thou. And we have precisely 107. So we're going to plus 149 and 107 together. All right, so we've got 256. So we divide that by 2 and we come up with the number 128. So we are well over where we need to be. So now we need to pull the chain off and either move it one sprocket or we need to adjust the camshaft. Now, before you fit the camshaft degree wheel, it's worthwhile noting to loosen these off beforehand to save you making any further adjustments and throwing this out of whack. So essentially we have too much advance at the moment, so I'm going to retard it all the way. So when it comes to a stop, we're then just going to nip them up. So I'm just going to nip up 2 of them because it doesn't matter so much that all of them need to be tightened up. Now we go back and redo our measurements. So once again, I'm going to go direction of rotation for 10 thou. So now if we have a look at this, we're at 135. We're going to go back the opposite way. Back to 10 thou. Our reading now is 93. All right, so doing some quick maths, we came to 228. So half of that is 114. So we are out by approximately 6 degrees. So what we now need to do is remove the camshaft timing chain. We need to rotate the sprocket back 1 tooth, and then we need to refit it and redo all the measurements. So this is what takes the most amount of time to make sure that you can get it right. A vernier timing chain is a really good setup because it enables you to have that adjustability, but you do have to dick around quite a lot to be able to remove the sprocket and stuff. Sometimes you can hit the nail on the head first try, other times you need to do it again and again and again to be able to get it right and dial it in. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll cut back at the end and see what measurements we get. Right, so we're going to go 10 thou one way. All right, record our measurement. So we're at 93. All right, come back to 0. Then go 10 thou the other way. And then this measurement is 135. So total of 228 divided by 2 comes to 114, so we're still a little bit high on this. Essentially now what we got to do, once again, I'll just flip the camera around, is loosen off the camshaft sprocket. We're going to adjust it one way, redo the measurements, see what it comes up as. If it either goes down or up, we know we're going in the right direction. I generally don't do this often enough to remember which way it needs to go, and I always get confused. But yeah, these are sort of measurements that you do need to do several times to be able to make sure that you get it right, because this is ultimately what's going to give you the most power or the most economy. All right, so we loosen that off. Let's adjust it this way. So I generally just go all the way, one way, see what it does. And then worst case scenario, we can just loosen it off again and redo our measurements. Reset this back to 0. So once again, take our first measurement. All right, so the first measurement is going to 146. And then we take our second measurement, which comes to 104. So we're at 250 divided by 2, so we're 125. So we've gone the wrong way. So once again, we'll do the exact same thing again, loosen it off, and we'll go the opposite way now. So we'll spin this clockwise. So I'm just going to go all the way there. Tighten that back up, just nip it. Now I think those only need to be like 7 or 8 Newton meters, so when you tighten them, you don't need to be swinging off it with a 1/2 inch breaker bar to be able to torque them up. Make sure you do follow the instructions when you're doing this to make sure that you do it all up to torque spec, especially the main nut as well for the camshaft, and use a new camshaft locking nut as well. All right, so we reset this again. All right, first measurement is going to be 120. We'll take our second measurement. I'll say 78. All right, so 198 divided by 2. So now we're at 99, so we've gone too far. So essentially what we're gonna do now is loosen it off and just move the camshaft sprocket incrementally the opposite way, and it's just fine tuning the cam timing now to make sure we get it between, I think it was said before, 106 and 108 full lift, number 1. All right, so these are the measurements. You just gotta really take your time doing, and you know, probably the 3rd or 4th time now that we've had to do this, but this is what ensures you make the best engine that you possibly can. First measurement, 128. Second measurement is 85. So 213 divided by 2 is 106.5. Great success! All right, so we pretty much are banging where we need this to be. Swift tune, say between 106 to 108 degrees. We've dialed it in at 106.5, so we are spot on. Essentially, this is what's going to help make the engine run so much better. So in conjunction with cylinder heads, flowing, port and polish, the right carburetor, so the right fueling system, the right ignition system, all these things are going to work in conjunction with each other and give the best possible outcome for their vehicle to run at its best performance or the best economy. So these are sort of things that you really need to make sure that you spend the time doing. Now, moving forward from here, essentially, you just want to remove the degree wheel, go ahead and retension all of the camshaft bolts that are around the outside, the camshaft locking nut as well. Don't forget to put a new lock tab on there, which we spoke about a second ago, which is just down there. I generally run a new crankshaft bolt as well, just because it's that little bit extra security knowing that it's brand new rather than running with the old one. Torque everything up, use a torque wrench and all, reassemble it, put in there. Make sure when you go to start it as well, which we'll do, make sure that you attach an oil pressure gauge as well. It's super important to make sure that you've got oil pressure in the entire engine, in its entirety, before you start it, because otherwise you're going to cause catastrophic failure and it's not going to be running at optimum performance, not for a very long time anyway, and you have to strip it down and redo it. So thanks so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button for all the best classic mini YouTube content. We've got one more episode coming out this month before we call it quits for Tomo's tune-ups for 2024. So thanks very much once again for being a part of the channel. We'll see you on the next episode of Tomo's Tune-Ups.